I'm an oddball. After a certain point in life,
Everybody keeps me writing being elegant.
Hey, I know that some of them you got some pocket thing going.
Yep. All right, this is an exceedingly long and slow study of the human life cycle, which is sometimes called the cycle of rebirth. And we have just passed the high point in that cycle in third heaven, and that marks the end of the postmortem and the beginning of the antenatal part of the cycle. Now, in Western mysticism, it's called the cycle of rebirth and not reincarnation. Reincarnation literally means re-entering the flesh. And there are many ways that can happen. Every morning when we wake up, it's a reincarnation, because if we've been out and away from our body at night, when we come back, we are reincarnated. Well, not all forms of reincarnation are as natural and as healthy as reawakening in the morning. For example, there are some that try to short-circuit the life cycle by possessing somebody else's body. Sometimes it's a partial thing, as in mediumship, and sometimes they actually take over and lock themselves in a full possession. Now, as I see it, mediumship doesn't do much good for either the possessing entity or for the medium who is the victim. Mediumship actually degrades the medium. Very, very rarely that they stay in health for long, because it's a very exhausting thing. And for the entities that take over, they're just postponing a self-reckoning and coming to terms with themselves. And if you've ever attended a seance, you know that most of what goes on there is psychic phenomena. When there is a sharing that comes through mediumship, the material, it's called channeling often, the material is not very good, and it's not something that you can check out. After you've seen so-called channeled material, very often you can see it. When you read it, it's really thin. It has a quality to it that is very different from other kinds of literature. But there are some positive things about mediumship, and that is if through a seance they make contact with a relative, for some people that is evidence that there is life after death, and they perk up and they live much better lives as a result of it. However, there are a lot of other ways that you can gain that same information, and it doesn't require all of the things that mediumship does. Now, it would be too much of a diversion to go into studying mediumship at this time. Happy to see you. I'm thinking that somewhere along the line we'll have to do a little mini sub-series on psychic phenomena. What's behind them, what they're all about. But let's get back on topic. This is going to be a very difficult night tonight, for me anyway. In rebirth, the spirit carries its creative intent through earthly experience. And thereby, it sees the whole of a cycle and all the stages of a cycle. And a cycle is a purposeful whole. If you try to repeat earthly experience without completing the postmortem stage, as those who possess other people do, you cannot really benefit much from the experience, because you've missed the whole part of the whole picture, and then you don't see the whole cycle. It's analogous to trying to understand a year without having one season of it. Something is missing. And there have been experiments that have been done to show the necessity of every part of a cycle. For example, at one time they started out with 2 plots of soil under exactly the same conditions, and they put plants in them. Only one plot between 11 and 12 every day, they denied those plants the sunlight. So they didn't have part of the cycle. And they did that throughout the growing season, and they let the plants go to seed. There wasn't much difference between the 2 plots. And then the next year, they planted the seeds from the 2 plots, and they didn't do anything. And they let them go to seed again. And by the 3rd year, the plants that had been denied that 1 hour of sunlight a day were all misformed and very weak plants and things like that. And something like that, that's something that illustrates what it's like when you miss part of a cycle. Something that's, it's important, because everything is tied together in nature and everything is important. For the most part, we as human beings are insensitive to some of the stages and some of the wholes. And the technicalization of our society has increased that. We're missing a lot, and we're not really in touch with what we're living in. And much of what we live in is artificial, and it's not like being in touch with nature. So in our times, if there is sensitivity, we find it more in the arts than we do in science or other social activities. Some painters will paint a landscape or a cathedral or something like that at different hours of the day and at different days of the year. Monet did a lot of that. And you could see what he was painting was different under all of those conditions, and different things came out of it. Some poets and authors can capture a moment, or they can capture a season so that you feel it very clearly. But those are all secondhand experiences. And it behooves us to, if we are mystical aspirants, it behooves us to actually observe and to get out into nature. In all honesty, I have to talk about myself and say I don't do that enough. And if you don't do that, you're cheating yourself. It's not been one of my strong suits at all. The times that I have spent in observation, I've reaped all kinds of benefits from it. All right. Now, in order to apply this to what we're trying to do, we have to return where we left off last time. And in the meeting previous to this, we spoke of the self being filled with the glory. The glory being all of its spiritual power available to itself and its connectedness to the universal spirit. And it is ready to come back to creation, or at least creative manifestation in these worlds. Now, we talked about that as the glory, as the general will, or the will to live. And it drives an entire life. Now, in this, there is a principle that we have mentioned before. And we will mention it now and again in the future because it's a really important principle. That is, when we give, we attract things to us. The very act of outpouring attracts things to us. We mentioned that when we talked about the desire world, how the whole principle of attraction and repulsion is based on giving or taking. And in recent talks, we've seen it in transcendental manifestations. We've seen how the invisible radiance of the divine spirit attracts the life spirit, which forms itself around the manifestations of divine spirit. Various manifestations of this principle appear different. Even some of the things appear inverse. For example, we mentioned that the imagination can draw out the impression from the divine spirit. So we're seeing here is a principle of giving and drawing things back. Now we have to see. First comes the disclaimer. In the next few minutes, probably for the rest of the evening, we're going to discuss some things that I don't understand really well. I can't speak with authority and I can't speak with confidence. And I can't speak with certitude on a lot of the material in these talks. The reason these talks are given is not because I think that I'm an authority and that I can pour out all kinds of truth or something like that. I offer what I offer because it's important. And it's much more important than many things in life. And it's offered to encourage investigation by others. And it is for me as well. This is how human progress is made, how understanding becomes more and more full. We just can't sit back and hope that understanding is going to come to us. We have to work for it. We have to do something. Now, some of the particulars in the remainder of this talk I have been working on for decades. And I still feel far from satisfied with the understanding that I have. The specific subject of difficulty has been mentioned several times before, but not with much elucidation. And there's not going to be much of it more tonight. And that subject is what is called seed atoms. Now, part of that nomenclature is terrific, and part of it is terrible, at least as I see things. It is the atom part that is terrible. It's not an atom like of bromine or molybdenum or something like that. It's something else. There's a lot of confusion about what the word atom means. It's taken from when we speak of seed atoms, it's taken from the ancients, the original meaning of the word atom. And the definition there is that it is the smallest bit of matter that is possible. Now, chemists and alchemists, when chemistry was being born, thought that that's what they were dealing with when they had the atoms of elements. But if we use the jargon of contemporary science, even subatomic particles are a lot larger than what is meant by atoms to the ancients. That definition by the ancients was something more like points, the definition of points in space, which have position and not much more. Now, according to trained clairvoyant investigators, after many investigations and corroborations, each of our different bodies, our vehicles of consciousness, has a seed atom. Everything in each of our bodies is associated with its particular seed atom. It's called a seed atom because it contains the essence of all previous manifestations of that particular vehicle. Just like the seed of a plant contains the history of all the previous manifestations of that plant. Just like the example that we had just a few minutes ago. This means that the seed atom of the dense physical body, which is located in the heart, is a record of every existence of form that we've had, going all the way back to our mineral-like condition in what is called the Saturn period. Similarly, there is a seed atom for the etheric vehicle located in the solar plexus. And it contains all of our experiences of the life of vitality, going all the way back to our plant-like condition in the sun period when we started to work with the principle of vitality. Similarly, there is a seed atom for the desire body, the astral body, but there it's a little more difficult because you're dealing with other dimensions. And it is located in the 3 dimensions, it's located in the area of the liver. You find that where there is primitive clairvoyance, you'll find that where we say, I love you from the bottom of my heart, in some primitive societies they will say, I love you from my liver. But that kind of love is maybe a naughty kind of love, depending on the kind of desire a person has. And we also have a seed atom of the mind. And it contains every thought that we've had since the beginning of the Earth period, since we started developing the concrete mind. The seed atom of the desire body was planted, so to speak, in the moon period. And in the moon period, that which is now desire was located in the region of concrete thought. The seed atom of the mind is in 3-dimensional space, located somewhere near the frontal sinus. Now, it is the constitution of these so-called atoms that's difficult for me to understand. They're not made up of chemicals or ethers or desire stuff, respectively. That can be said because the spiritual scientists who have made all of the observations very carefully have observed that in the post-mortem, when the work is done with the physical body, the spirit takes the seed atom with it into the inner worlds, and eventually all of the seed atoms go into the center of being in the concrete mind, or where the concrete mind meets the abstract mind, or where matter meets spirit. Now, obviously, there's like that old joke that says you don't find somebody, or you don't find a hearse pulling a U-Haul behind it because you don't take your possessions with you after death. And obviously, we can't take the chemicals into the world of thought. So it's clear that these atoms are not made of either chemical stuff, or of etheric stuff, or of desire stuff, but they all eventually end up in the center of being. It's possible that they're a kind of mind stuff because they are with the spirit right to the threshold of the transcendent spiritual worlds. In some ways, they're like thoughts or like thought forms in that they attract the stuff to them that should be attracted, and that's what thoughts are all about. Thoughts attract desires, or thoughts as much as they impel them. At this point in my understanding, I'm of the opinion that there's something like para-thoughts, or proto-thoughts, or germinal thoughts, where things come from spiritual potential into actuality in the concrete mind. And that state of potentiality can be carried right into the different bodies. But that's not something I want to be quoted on as saying something like that is a certainty. I'm also of the opinion that each of these foci, if you want to, there's a better word than atoms, is in three-dimensional space spread out, but in actuality that when it comes to being at the center of being, they're concentric, or they're actually literally congruent. I'm pretty sure that they are loci, or focal points, in cosmic root substance. And cosmic root substance is the state between the manifest and the absolute, where things come from the absolute, which is unknowable directly, through potential. So there they are foci of potential. Now we get into something that I can't get into, that I can't go into really a lot now, but maybe in the future. There are cosmogonies that have been developed by mystics at different times. And according to them, the foci, or these points, are set up at different angles. They're set up at different angles by the breath, which is what we would call life spirit. And they are set spinning by the third force of a threefold spirit. Different words are used in different societies. Madame Blavatsky uses the word fohat for the force that sets them spinning. And according to the angle is the kind of world that they become, the stuff that they become, and that it is a matter, you might say, of spiritual massaging or spiritual manipulation that the different worlds come into being around these primary points. At any rate, our set of these, which may be one, are with the spirit right where spirit meets matter, at the apex of the personality and the bottom of the individuality. Now, this answers a lot of questions that are too deep and too difficult and too protracted for now, but when we get to cosmogony, I'm going to take a swing at them. But please remember about these things, that these are somewhat speculative, and there are ponderings from studying and a lot of contemplating on these things for years, many years. Some of these have over 55 years I've been working on. So I have found it to be a fruitful understanding, and I certainly recommend going into things like that. If nothing else, they keep you off the streets and keep you away from frivolous activities. And you have nothing to lose by doing these things, studying these things, and a lot to gain. All right. We're just about finished with a lot of the near gibberish talking tonight. Getting back to the topic, we're trying to understand the descent of this individuality into the personality. And that's a big, major change in consciousness. One is moving from subsistence in spirit into existence in matter. One is going from the transcendental to the phenomenal. Now, in the talk previous to this, we spoke about the will to live and the fullness of the Spirit with glory. With that, there was an intense creative impulse to give, and to give in the creation. Not only that, but in our individual life and with those that we love, or even the nature that we love. So there was an urge to come to rebirth that was an outflowing. Now actually, that is only part of the story at this moment. It is the push part of what is a push-pull activity. We are drawn to rebirth as well as impelling ourselves to rebirth. So we need to talk a little bit for the rest of the evening about the pull side of coming to rebirth. It's not as deep and lofty and abstract as the push side, but in its totality, it's every bit as difficult. The pull side of rebirth is not spoken of very much in Western mysticism. And it's spoken of a lot in Eastern mysticism. It is spoken of in general as part, or as you might say, the innards of cyclical reality. The word that they have for it is samsara, which to many people studying in the East or in studying ancient things is almost like a curse word. It means we have to come back here. In being more particular about it, it is something in the ongoing stage of things that draws us back to earth. In the East and in ancient times, it was associated with karma, which is not the same thing as cause and consequence as seen in the West. In that view of things, there's much less stress on freedom. And any freedom that we do have is the freedom to escape the wheel of rebirth. Now, I'm not going to go into a digression on Eastern and Western or ancient and modern differences. That's, just not that interesting to me. And I don't think it's that important. It's enough to say that in the East, And in the past, the whole cycle is associated with suffering and misery and death. That isn't the fault of the cycle. That's what we have put into the cycle. But at any rate, it's seen as decidedly negative. I don't want to get into those things except to see how to heal them and how to work more harmoniously with the purpose of the cycle. The wheel of rebirth is going somewhere, and we want to be able to go along with it. And as usual, we're going to try to get to the simplest and the most basic or fundamental principles behind this. And when we have that, the circumstances will be more relevant. Now, we just said some things that were not pleasant about Eastern and ancient views of the cycle of rebirth, and they were rather negative. But because they're negative, it doesn't mean that they're untrue. And it doesn't mean that the negativity is untrue. It's obvious that we have set a lot of causes into action that have not been fulfilled. We haven't learned from all of our actions. And it's a positive and a healthy outlook to look at cause and consequence as a learning tool, and certainly as a creative tool. We don't have to see it as burdensome and to be escaped as much as possible or as quickly as possible. But even in the West, we hear things like we're born into sin and nothing of the world is good. There's a lot of negativity about what is our greatest opportunity at this time in the evolutionary creation to advance and become something. We have to live in the moment, even though we don't know how the circumstances that we have come to be. We have tragic things happen to us because we can't remember from past lives the things that we set into motion to come ripe at this time. However, to think that cause and consequence and rebirth and the whole creative scheme or divine plan is something to escape as soon as possible is blasphemous. It's missing the whole point of it all, the whole point of life. It's a crude analogy, but it's like saying we are put here to bang our head against the wall so that when we quit banging our head against the wall, it feels good. That's a not healthy way. It's an outlook that should be pitied, if anything. It's stated beautifully by the poet Oliver Wendell Holmes. He says, "Weep not for those who bear the cross, but for those who bear the cross without the glory." There are these fruits that we have earned and we haven't reaped. And they draw us back. We haven't finished something. We have unfinished business. So what we're trying to get at is that cause and consequence, whether the consequences be pleasant or unpleasant, do draw us back. We owe, and we have things owed to us, and we can't separate ourselves from our deeds. What we are, we become what we are through our deeds, or what we do or what we don't do. Now, this doesn't mean that we're trapped in some kind of a cosmic destiny mill. It seems like that to some people right now, but what we are in is a gigantic learning and creating process through which everything in the universal spirit is benefiting. We are fulfilling some kind of higher purpose. So, in short, one part of the pull of bringing us back to rebirth is unfulfilled destiny. Oh, when I started assembling these notes, trying to think about the pull side of things and the descent of the individuality into personality, it was really hard because I was drawing on things and opening thoughts that are not very clear. My experience has been, when this happens, provided you don't mislead people and provided you don't state yourself as some kind of ultimate authority, it's better to state what you know now. Because if you state now, something more comes behind. Or if you don't say something, nothing comes. That's been my experience about all of this. And for me, this is probably the perfect time in life to address some of these things, because it's unlikely that I'll not get an opportunity for a long, long time to do this particular thing. So the thought is a little bit immature, but we're going to go ahead anyway, and it'll be a start for all of us. So please bear with me. Every time this subject is pondered, some polarity comes out. It is a polarity that has many facets to it, but two of them stand out. It's the polarity between freedom and necessity, or freedom within necessity, or creation versus acceptance. Accepting things as they are, or creatively transmuting them. In this, I always come down on the side of freedom and of creation. Though I can't say that my life has been especially creative or that it is especially free. Now, when you have a polarity like this, both psychologically and spiritually, when one side is stressed, the other side is activated. That appears to be a universal law. In psychology, Jung called it an antiodromia. So, we're going to try and deal with that. That's going to be a little imbalanced. This is going to be short. We're not even going to be an hour tonight because it's too hard. First, let's begin with something that is close to an argument for the pull side as of matter and destiny. In St. John's Gospel, everything in the creation is from the creative word. At the other extreme, when Hamlet is asked what he's reading, he says, words, 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 in a very sarcastic way. In our common folk language, when we promise to do something, we say, I give you my word. Sometimes it's physical, we give a signature, but a name is different than a word. It's a specialized word. And in words, one of the most, we could have, before when we talked about the breath on the points in cosmic root substance, that is the word. Now, one of the most painful sets of words that a parent can hear from a child is, I didn't ask to be born. Probably the being that is that child did ask, but that's beside the point. The point is whether when the cosmic word started everything, whether we chose to participate in freedom, to create, or were we chosen and had no say in the matter. This is one of those cases that I always come down on the side of freedom. We agreed. We didn't even have a self to agree, but only a potential self. And that freedom had to have been present, even if only in potential, from the very beginning. You don't gain freedom. Freedom is there and you awaken it. You take it, so to speak. So in a way, we may say we give our word, and if we gave our word at the very beginning, and it eventually becomes our creative word. Now, creation in the word or any other way is not half-hearted. You can't give a half-hearted creation. You have to give your all. And within the evolutionary creation, one gives all of one's spiritual being. If you don't, the creation will not be fulfilled. So whether we remember it or not, we gave our word, and our word stays with us. Hence, when we are at that pivotal moment, when the post-mortem becomes the antenatal, our word, our commitment, comes back to us, or we are aware of it. And that is a very big part of the pull side, of the push-pull side of the individuality coming into the personality and us coming to rebirth. There's a little aside on this. If we try to demit from a previous commitment, there's always the greatest of disdain that is heaped on a person for trying to do that. It's like in that altruistic life spirit which we share together, we are as one. We are more than a team. We're closer together. I can tell a little story. When I was a freshman at the university here, there was a man that was in some of my classes. His name was Jim Biggs, and he was the star of the basketball team, and I didn't know that. And we hung out together, and through him I got to know a lot of the scholarship athletes. And toward the end of the year, all of the fraternities on campus had a track and field meet to see which fraternity was superior to which other one. And a lot of the black athletes were in their own fraternity. And it came down to a relay race. And the relay race was very important to winning the whole business. And he was running one leg of the relay race, and he didn't win his segment of the relay race, and all of his closest friends turned on him. They were hard on him because he didn't give his all. And so there is that kind of commitment not only to our own word in the creation, but there is a commitment to the others that we have agreed to work together to carry this out. Some of the most heinous deeds that have ever been perpetrated in humanity have been perpetrated because of assuming or seeing that some people didn't hold up their part of the bargain. They didn't run their leg of the relay as well as they could have. Some mystics even believe that what the Jews have suffered from different societies, because every society seems to have taken a shot at them, was behind that kind of a thing. Even the Nazi Holocaust. Very nasty. All right, let's get back on topic. Let's look at the pull side of things in a very different way. There was a poet whose name I couldn't remember, who said something to the effect that nature is a whore who cannot resist the desires of any of the gods, meaning to say that it had to give itself to any creative thing rather than adoring nature. It was looking at nature in a different way. Now, the Chinese look at that same thing, the relationship of heaven and earth, in a different way. They say, if heaven can create it, earth can find a use for it. And for the Chinese, that universal use is usually food. The Chinese diet has almost anything in it. They even use centipedes as medicine. On the other hand, the Occident has nothing to brag about either. We have things like lutefisk and pickled herring and head cheese and things like that. So we can't lay it. So the principle we're trying to get at here is complementation with an E, not an I. Complements need each other, or complements fulfill each other, or complements bring out a unity that they both share. To a creative writer, a blank sheet is a gift. It is an enticement. It is a reward. So when the individuality peers into the phenomenal realms, it sees a glorious field of opportunity. That has a draw to it, a really big pull. There are some things that are so beautiful that you can't help but to do them. Now let's try to take this a step further. In the descent of the personality into the individuality, the descent takes place right at the central focus of the mind, which we've been talking about all night. All of the material creation is reflectively projected through that focal point. That point is the center of being. It is the origin of both spirit and matter, which is almost impossible for me to grasp. There are states of spirit that are higher and deeper, life spirit, virgin spirit. Those are higher and deeper states, but they have their origin also at that same focal point. That point, the center of being, can even be called the source of all manifest being, whether it be spiritual or matter, material or whatever. It is the focal point in potential, and potential stands between the absolute and the manifest, and the absolute is unknowable or unspeakable. Now, this is something almost impossible to speak of, at least here, because we have our waking consciousness centered in stuff. We're not even aware often of the differences between spirit and matter. At this time in the evolutionary creation, we are barely conscious of our spiritual being. If we knew our spiritual being, we would be in awe of what we have been created as. So to speak of something that is beyond spirit is almost an incomprehensible thing. And then to say that that is simultaneously the source of all matter, chemical matter, etheric matter, desire matter, that's mind-boggling. However, if you have just one minor clairvoyant experience or out-of-the-body experience, you see right away that this stuff isn't very dense at all. You can walk right through it. It's gross, it's coarse, but it's not dense at all. So the idea that spirit and matter could have a common source is not hard to comprehend, but it is not out of possibility. Now, in the spirit-matter polarity, the spirit part is obviously more awake, more aware, more conscious, and the material part is the polar reflection of unconsciousness. It's the part of us that's becoming. We've said that many times before, that there is the process of the spiritualization of matter, and that takes place by spirit interacting with matter, and through soul, the matter becomes spiritualized. Now, if we remember that the moment the spirit, the individuality, is at its highest point in the life cycle, it's as conscious as it can be at this time, and it's as filled with creativity as it can be at this time. It's in full power, full potency. When it peers through the center of being, it kens, I don't know of another word for it, the unwakingly conscious part of its being. The part of its being that it really almost doesn't know at itself, but it senses that that is part of its being, the unfulfilled part of its being, the potential. And that's very glamorous. At this time of the year, we talk about baseball, and general managers talk about phenoms. They see all this potential. Whether the potential manifests or not is another thing, but they are fascinated and drawn to all of that potential. And if we think of all of the potential that we are, of which we are deeply unconscious, but which is as much a part of our being as our aware spiritual being, we can see that there's a tremendous draw in all of that. It's something vaguely like a mother who sees a child as part of herself, but doesn't really know how. It is something like a mystery to be solved, as well as an opportunity to create. There's a real draw. That's what draws us on the path, draws us into the spirit, and the spirit draws the personality into itself. We ask, who are we? What are we? What is the purpose of it all? And in asking that question, we draw ourselves to it. It's again like a blank sheet of paper to a writer, or a blank canvas to a painter. Goethe, when he wrote Faust, he was writing until he was 84 years old. And the closing of it is, he talks about the eternal feminine that ever leads us onward. Not the whore that the other poet had, but it's the eternal feminine that leads us on, that we can't resist. Obviously, this is an inescapable draw. It's a pull that cannot be resisted, because if anything, we want to know the truth. We want to be the truth. Now this happens when the individuality descends into the personality. But probably almost all of us are not aware of it. We get a sense of it, even when we look into nature, we get a sense of it. There are so many mysteries that should be solved that we haven't solved. Now the interesting thing about this is that in the very beginning of these talks, those many years ago, we started talking with first principles. And one of those first principles was the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. And at that time, we covered it pretty superficially, almost trivially. But now we can see that when we are at our spiritual brightest, we see that dark shadow. But that dark shadow is not something negative. That dark shadow is pregnant with possibilities. And that is one of the big things for drawing us back to rebirth. All right. That's it for this evening. Questions? Yes.
When you were talking about the different stages of development, like the mineral-like ones
Yes.
and the plant ones,
Yes.
a question came to me. Is it mandatory to start at the mineral existence, or do you think some people skip some? Or
Yes, it is mandatory. How to say it? We start out as simple and as unconscious as we can be, and it is with great spiritual wisdom that things are built into us. And when we awaken to those things, we understand the wonder of them. But the first thing that we do then is we evict them. We throw them out of us, because we can only be free beings by, it takes in us. And we have those qualities in us, and so we have to throw them out. But the way we throw them out, it's not like refuse or like non-recyclable. we then, as we come into wisdom ourselves, we give them to other beings coming behind us, so that and throughout all of this, because there is creative innovation and there is continuously greater consciousness, the whole business expands in that way.
okay, because there's some people I deal with in my daily life that makes me think maybe they skipped a couple of stages.
Yeah. Yes.
I was wondering, as far as seed atoms go, plants, minerals, animals, angels,
What?
classes of being?
Yes. We started in the words that were to be very careful. We were mineral-like, and then we were plant-like, and then we were animal-like, and then we become human. When we become human is when we have the thought, when we have that connection between spirit and matter that we've been talking about all night. And then the spirit has been forming at the same time that the personality has been forming. And when the spirit can enter into its vehicles, then waking self-consciousness occurs. In fact, that's what the topic of the next talk is, how the spirit creates the next life.
So animals don't carry a seed atom?
I don't know. They must. I don't know. I am not that kind of a seer that I can see, but I think nothing is lost. Nothing is lost, so there must be something like a seed atom, if not there. It's just that it had the seed atom of thought has not yet been differentiated. I wish there were a different word than seed atom, though. Yeah, it's kind of a
like-
clunky word.
I like foci, what you used. The foci, focus.
Yes.
That seems good. But what about, so angels probably?
What?
Angels,
What about angels?
do they have a seed atom? Of a different nature?
Yeah, I think it's a universal phenomenon.
Okay.
I think that everything starts at the center of being. You see, the series that comes after this sub-series is going to be on cosmogony. And it's probably going to take the rest of my life to talk about the cosmogony, because there's so many, many things, and they're all so hard that it'll take me that long to get through it. Yes, but nothing is lost. Though, if you want to have two simple principles for the entire cosmos, everything is connected to everything, and nothing is lost. And those two principles, you're very much of a Steiner person, and he makes that statement with regard to nature. He says everything in nature is interconnected, and you can't mess with one thing without messing with other things. My goodness, this is a first. Bonnie without a bunch of questions. You look good. I like the smile.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.